You're new to cycling and you're looking up bike reviews or potential upgrades for your bike, and you keep hearing phrases like, this bike is incredibly stiff, it rides like a rocket ship. These cranks are so much stiffer, I don't think I could ever go back to something that's more flexy. Meanwhile, you're just sitting there thinking, what the heck does stiffness even mean? What's up, I'm Gallardo. Life is short, but don't make it shorter, so be sure to ride your bike every day to be reasonably dangerous, and consider subscribing and hitting the like button so YouTube can know to recommend you more fixed gear and cycling videos just like this one. In this episode of Too Afraid to Ask, Gilbert asks, whenever you mention that a bike feels stiff, what exactly do you mean? And Alexis asks, do you have to upgrade your stock crankset? I don't know what an upgrade actually does besides it's stiffer. In this video, I'll give you a technical definition of bike stiffness, talk about how most of us use the word stiffness and related words in a less technical sense, and why stiffness matters to you and your bike. Just know that stiffness is one of the most controversial subjects in the cycling world. There aren't clear answers and there's lots of conflicting opinions. Important thing to note, I'm not an engineer or a physicist, but if you are, feel free to add your thoughts about bike stiffness in the comments below. And shout out to our channel sponsor, Wabi Cycles, for making these fixed gear videos possible. Wabi sent over their Thunder for me to spec and build up as the ultimate fixed gear commuter bike. The Thunder seemed like an awesome combination of being insanely practical while also being fun to ride. Feel free to check out my buildup of the Wabi Thunder by clicking the card above. When cyclists use the word stiffness, we usually use it to describe a few things: our frame set, our handlebars and stem, our wheel sets, and our cranks. We say things like Omniums are technically stiffer than 75s, Velocity Deep Vs would be able to build a stiffer wheel than something like H+ Sun TB14s, or the large diameter tubing of aluminum bikes allows them to be designed and built stiffer than the smaller diameter tubing on steel bikes. But what does that all exactly mean? It's helpful to think of bike stiffness as a spectrum, where the stiffer a bike component is, that means the less flexible it is. And a bike essentially acts as a spring. You load the bike up with energy, it flexes a little bit, then it springs back to its original shape when the pedaling force is released. Bike stiffness is how much a bike component flexes when a certain amount of force is applied to it. For instance, an aluminum frame with thick looking tubing will likely flex less when you pedal it at the same power compared to a steel frame with skinnier looking tubing. People often talk about the lateral stiffness and the vertical stiffness of bikes. Lateral stiffness is the type of stiffness that you mostly feel in the bottom bracket area while you're pedaling your bike. Of course, this graphic is greatly exaggerated just to illustrate a point. But if we take a look at a bottom bracket from the front, the bottom bracket area flexes from side to side while pedaling and then springs back to its neutral position while at rest or between pedal strokes. Most people typically don't enjoy riding frames that are overly flexible in the bottom bracket area because they can feel slow and feel mushy to pedal, because you don't feel much of the forward push of your pedal stroke until after the frame set springs back to its original state. With overly flexible frame sets, that can lead to a disconnect between your inputs, your pedal stroke, and the feedback, the bike going forward. On the other hand, laterally stiff frames feel faster because your pedaling energy is transferred to the drivetrain faster. So you feel the forward movement of your pedal stroke more immediately, if ever so slightly. I want to place an emphasis on feel slower and feel faster. There's a myth that stiffer components and frame sets transfer energy to the drivetrain more efficiently than ones that flex. But the bike acts as an efficient spring, so incredibly little to no energy is lost when a bike flexes, but rather the energy is transferred to the drivetrain at a different rate. Whether that matters for being as fast as possible on your bike is up for debate. GCN made this great video, and Bicycle Quarterly ran a couple of tests, and both of them found that stiffer frame sets don't necessarily mean a faster bike. The other type of stiffness that cyclists like to talk about is vertical stiffness. This is the type of stiffness that you mostly feel in your stem, bars, cranks, wheels, and tires when pedaling. This type of stiffness is also very subjective, and there's no best for everybody, despite what bike reviewers such as myself would like to lead you to believe. There's a lot of people that follow the school of thought that think more stiffness is better because more stiffness is faster. I think it's a myth, and they want all their components to have the best stiffness to weight ratios. While others, such as myself, think that too much stiffness in the wrong places on the frame or in the wrong components can make the bike jarring to ride and feel like you have to fight the bike to get it going. How is it that there's such conflicting opinions when it comes to the same quality on bikes? Well, bikes and what you and I enjoy about bikes and the language that we use to describe that experience is messy. When the vast majority of cyclists use the term stiffness and its related phrases, we're using a quantitative word. Stiffness is something that you can measure to describe a qualitative experience, how much we enjoy riding the bike. When I, or pretty much anyone describing how a bike feels, say a bike is stiff or mushy or flexy or rides like a rocket ship or rides like a jackhammer, we're using a pool of words under the stiffness umbrella to describe multiple things. How fast a bike feels, how comfortable a bike feels, how confidently it feels, and how good it feels to pedal. Technically, stiffness is a quality of bike components that you can measure in a lab. But what cyclists actually mean when we say stiffness describes how a bike or bike parts feel in relation to other bikes or parts, meaning the way I or anyone describing a bike uses the word stiffness only makes sense when you have at least one other bike to compare to as a frame of reference. For instance, when talking about crank stiffness, my Andel cranks feel as stiff as 75s and feel much more stiff than these stock cranks. To me, they feel nicer to pedal, they feel like I can go faster, and they feel like they give me more feedback that I happen to like, that I perceive as going faster and being able to ride at my best. But unless we isolate the variables of these different components, it's impossible to actually know whether the stiffness between these cranks are actually contributing to a meaningful difference. But what I do actually know is that I like the way my Andels ride, I like the way Sugino 75s ride, and I like the way these ride better than these cheapo stock cranks. For another example, we can take my Wabi against this aluminum bike. I like the balance between stiffness and compliance that my Wabi has. It feels like it has stiffness in the right places and flexes the right amount when I pedal, and it feels like the bike planes, as if with each pedal stroke, the bike is encouraging me to keep on pedaling. Compare that with this pretty stiff aluminum frame set. It feels too stiff to me, and each pedal stroke feels like I'm stomping on concrete, almost like I have to fight the bike to get it going. It's stiff, it's chattery, it feels fragile, it does not inspire confidence. To answer your original question, do you need to upgrade your cranks to something stiffer? No, you don't, as long as you're happy on your current crankset. Stiffness is a messy can of worms in the cycling world, so here's what you need to know. Cycling is an incredibly personal experience. If you're happy riding your bike, just keep riding it and be happy. Stiffness and related words is one category that we use to describe the way a bike rides. The vast majority of the times that you hear the word stiffness is a qualitative description, not a quantitative measurement that it actually is. And we use it to describe how a bike feels. There's a myth that stiffer bikes are faster. The evidence says that's not the case, so just ride whatever you like. If you're interested in the technical side to cycling, Feel free to check out this video, my guide to geometry charts part 1 and 2. And Fixie famous shoutouts to Ryan Witt and Stan Strong 108 for helping to make these fixed gear and cycling videos possible through their support on Patreon.